our featured speaker for the night, Maria Pinto. Maria is a Boston area writer, mycophile, and educator, and she teaches for the literary nonprofit Grub Street. She's been awarded fellowships by the Vermont Studio Center, the Writers' Room of Boston, the Mastheads, the Garret on the Green, and she's given talks about mushrooms all over, including for the New York Mycological Society, Central Texas Mycological Society, and the Wisconsin Mycological Society, among others. She is working on a book right now, a nonfiction book, and she said it's inspired by mushrooms. It'll be from the University of North Carolina Press. So we're going to make her come for an in-person book release party event whenever that happens. And I'll let you know when those tickets are available. I'm just personally so thrilled to have Maria speaking, and I will turn it over to her. Thank you, Maria. And her talk is entitled "Dispatches from the African Diaspora." But she may have a better pronunciation. But I love puns, so I thought that was wonderful.
You gotta go for the puns whenever.
I love a pun.
Whenever they're available, you just reach for them.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Annie, for that wonderful introduction and for inviting me. And thank you, Alden, for that very informative talk. I'm just gonna jump right in and take up the whole time that I've been allotted. And I just want to thank you all for taking this little trip with me. So I just wanted to start by saying that this is above all going to be an idiosyncratic journey through the spaces where my research took me, through the mythological, the epistemological, artistic, and taxonomic aspects of my topic, mushrooms in the African diaspora. Since I didn't know exactly what I would find during my exploration, this presentation reflects how I move through information gathering. That won't always look like a straight line, and it will morph and has been morphing as I get more input from folks who attend. In that way, I hope it never stops changing. So another note is that this talk is very much not about completism. I'm hoping that you'll just crane your necks with me to look down some of the rabbit holes I found when I got curious about mushrooms in African contexts and their diasporic lineages. So I'm just gonna share my screen right quick. And optimize for sound and all that good stuff. All right, so when we look at the etymology of spore, I'd like for us to notice that at its root, it means to spread, to sow. And I want us to sort of hold that meaning in mind as we move through these materials. But first, just a quick question. Can I hear from some of you about what your ancestors' relationships to fungi has been, if you know? You can drop things in the chat, or like we can hear from like a couple of you maybe, if you wanna unmute. And you can say like, my ancestors hated mushrooms. They thought they were gross. Oh, we're getting some chat responses. Not aware of any. Ancestors were truffle hunters in France. Jealous. Chat culture. I went mushroom hunting in the Switzerland of Bohemia, and it was amazing. I heard there was a fire there recently. Okay, cool. So I'm very jealous of people who have sort of like ancestral relationships with mushrooms. So I don't know why this isn't going. This is a chart from the late great mycologist, Gary Linkoff's The Complete Mushroom Hunter. And as many of you know, Gary famously said that we should all quit our jobs and just drop everything in the interest of studying fungi. In all accounts of him, he's remembered as the most passionate, kind, and funny of mycologists. And I'm sad that I missed my opportunity to fangirl out in his presence anyway. But here, in an efficient but perhaps a little reductive way, he categorizes whole continents, countries and regions as either mycophobic or mycophilic. And to hear this chart tell it, if you're from East Asia, if you're not from East Asia or continental Europe or other loosely defined ethnic regions, it's unlikely that a love for or even tolerance of fungi is your inheritance. But I want to read a little between the lines of this chart, because when I see scattered peoples in West and East Africa, that isn't very evocative to me. It makes me want to fill in the blanks and paint a more vivid picture. So I went mycophile hunting. And here is some of what I found. So in the 1980s, American musicologist Louis Sarno recorded some singularly beautiful sounds that he describes as woman gathering mushrooms. This song captures Aka women in what is now the Central African Republic, engaged in mushroom foraging, their voices reverberating through the forest. And in Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Life, a book I recommend to those who both like mushrooms and a well-turned phrase, the mycologist Merlin Sheldrake mentions this song and its use of a masterly polyphonic vocal technique. So I'm going to do this and do this. Sorry, bear with me. There it is. I'm really glad that you aren't seeing the tab or the window that has 15,000 tabs open, and you're just seeing the one with 4. So if you have any feelings during what I'm playing of the recording, please feel free to drop them in the chat.
I don't think we can hear that playing.
Oh no.
Yeah, I think when you do share screen, there's a setting
Optimize
to
for sound, which I thought I did. Let me just make sure that's ticked. Sorry about this. I was sure that I had.
No worries. But I want to see your tabs. I want to see the 50,000 tabs. I want to know what they are.
Never.
I feel like people's tabs are like, it should be like the new psychoanalysis where you get to like see where people's minds go. Or I don't want anyone to see my tabs either.
It's playing.
Oh, okay. Wait, you can hear it?
I can hear it here in Seattle.
Huh. That's so strange because
I don't hear it.
Huh.
Maybe I'm hearing something else. Sorry.
those are the voices in your head.
Okay, well, I don't really understand what's going on because it wasn't playing. And now I'm hearing that some people can hear it and some people can't.
No, I'm sorry. That was something
no
else.
one can hear
Oh,
it.
okay. All right, so now I'm gonna try once more and I'm gonna really just blast it like,
The sound is muted there on your YouTube.
Can you hear it now?
No, still
Nope.
no.
Do you want to send us the link?
Yeah, I do.
And then we can take a moment of silence to listen at home simultaneously.
So you still can't hear it? This is bizarre to me. Okay, I'm gonna drop the okay, so Y'all can hear it. You can hear it individually. I will, in the interest of time, just continue to say that when I first heard this, it made complete sense to me when I heard that Merlin Sheldrake characterized this beautiful sort of like almost haunting thing as mycelium is polyphony in bodily form, which if you can hear it, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. I really hope the other sounds will share. All right. So the next thing to grab and hold my interest was a story from the Baganda people of Uganda. As you'll see, so much of what I found about mushrooms in Africa comes from this area, so I think it must be an important sporulator for the diaspora. This is an origin story of the clan called the Butiko, which means mushroom. This story was told to musicologist and professor Dr. Damascus Kafumbe by a drummer in the Kaganda tradition of music. It's from the professor's 2018 book, Tuning the Kingdom. I'm just going to read the story as he wrote it down. Near the beginning of the 14th century, a man named Keba Gaba set out to hunt animals in the company of his 2 sons. However, the 3 hunters never caught any game. On their way back home, they decided to collect firewood and forage for food. While doing so, they stumbled upon a thicket filled with small, white, delicate mushrooms called butiko. Keba Gaba and his sons decided to pick the butiko. As they were collecting the fungi, a man with whom Keba Gaba was competing for leadership stealthily approached him and assaulted him. The victim's 2 sons ran in panic to inform their relatives and friends about their father's misfortune. On hearing the news, the relatives and friends rushed to the scene in hopes of rescuing Keba Gaba. However, they found neither him nor the bundle of firewood and butiko he had been collecting. In order to ease their grief, Keba Gaba's relatives resolved never to eat the butiko that had led to the attack. These events led to the establishment of the Butiko clan, with the butiko serving as the clan's primary totem or muziro. When Keba Gaba vanished, his surviving relatives approached a sage and expressed to him their grief over the mysterious disappearance of their loved one. The mourners were particularly disturbed by their failure to locate and bury his remains appropriately. In response, the sage assured the mourners that supernatural forces had carried the remains to the moon. Before long, the grievers saw what they believed to be their deceased relative on the moon carrying a bundle of firewood on his head. They also saw what looked to them like the butiko he had picked before the attack, strewn all over the moon's surface. So that's the story the Butiko clan tells about how the butiko, the mushroom, became their totem and thus taboo for them to eat. However, apparently there is a Baganda phrase that encourages members of other clans who do not consider the butiko a clan totem to harvest and eat them. And there's another phrase that advises potential consumers of the fungi on how to pick them, uproot them completely without letting their caps become detached from the bases. So do people have responses to that? What do you get from that story? You can type the answers in or raise your hands or just shout out. So to me, this story seems to be doing several things. Paul.
One basic question is it, since they had a taboo about eating it, is it poisonous or is it edible? Or none of the above?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think based on the sort of artistic renderings that I've seen around, that it's probably Termitomyces microcarpus because it's always on termite mounds. So it's probably not, but I hear what you're saying about I hear what you're saying about taboos, maybe sort of matching up with things that are poisonous, but food taboos are also just this way for an in-group to define themselves as against an out-group, right? They eat that, but we don't really eat that.
Yeah, fair enough. I just was wondering what the, um, yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And it also, I'm fascinated by this idea that, we can't eat that, but we want to share with you some safe harvesting or some best practices for harvesting. There's some real culturally inflected mycophilia there, in my view. Next, we're going to move on to this other thing that requires me to share sound. So hopefully it'll do it this time. Okay, optimize for sound. Everything is a go so far. Okay, we're gonna do this and hope. Okay. You can see that, right?
Mhm.
Yep.
West African Tales YouTube is in the room with us. Okay.
Yes.
How mushrooms first grew, from West African Folk Tales by William H. Barker. Long ago, there dwelt in a town two brothers whose bad habits brought them much trouble. Day by day, they got more deeply in debt. Their creditors gave them no peace. So at last they ran away into the woods. They became highway robbers. But they were not happy. Their minds were troubled by their evil deeds. At last, they decided to go home, make a big farm, and pay off their debts gradually. They accordingly set to work and soon had quite a fine farm prepared for corn. As the soil was good, they hoped the harvest would bring them in much money. Unfortunately, that very day a bushfowl came along. Being hungry, it scratched up all the newly planted seeds and ate them. The two poor brothers, on arriving at the field next day, were dismayed to find all their work quite wasted. They put down a trap for the thief. That evening, the bushfowl was caught in it. The two brothers, when they came and found the bird, told it that now all their debts would be transferred to it because it had robbed them of the means of paying the debts themselves. The poor bird, in great trouble at having such a burden thrust upon it, made a nest under a silk cotton tree. There it began to lay eggs, meaning to hatch them and sell the young birds for money to pay off the debts. A terrible hurricane came, however, and a branch of the tree came down. All the eggs were smashed. As a result, the bushfowl transferred the debts to the tree, as it had broken the eggs. The silk cotton tree was in dismay at having such a big sum of money to pay off. It immediately set to work to make as much silk cotton as it possibly could, that it might sell it. An elephant, not knowing all that had happened, came along. Seeing the silk cotton, he came to the tree and plucked down all its bearings. By this means, the debts were transferred to the poor elephant. The elephant was very sad when he found what he'd done. He wandered away into the desert, thinking of a way to make money. He could think of none. As he stood quietly under a tree, a poor hunter crept up. This man thought he was very lucky to find such a fine elephant standing so still. He at once shot him. Just before the animal died, he told the hunter that now the debts would have to be paid by him. The hunter was much grieved when he heard this, as he had no money at all. He walked home wondering what he could do to make enough money to pay the debts. In the darkness, he did not see the stump of a tree which the overseers had cut down in the road. He fell and broke his leg. By this means, the debts were transferred to the tree stump. Not knowing this, a party of white ants came along next morning and began to eat into the tree. When they had broken it nearly to the ground, the tree told them that now the debts were theirs, as they had killed it. The ants, being very wise, held a council together to find out how best they could make money. They decided each to contribute as much as possible. With the proceeds, one of their young men would go to the nearest market and buy pure linen thread. This they would weave and sell, and the profits would go to help pay the debts. This was done. From time to time, all the linen in stock was brought and spread out in the sunshine to keep it in good condition. When men see this linen lying out on the anthills, they call it mushroom and gather it for food.
All right. So what are your responses to that? Some people were saying in the chat that they found it sad. I think it's really interesting to think about like debts being transferred, you know, among organisms, non-human, human, the sort of like shared nature of the world that we live in. But like the mycelium, the mycelial network, yes, the cotton threads. I was so thrilled to hear that just sort of beautiful storified rendition of mycelium, of mushroom fruiting bodies. It's really just, I thought, a very stunning origin story. So as we know, not everything worth knowing was or needs to be written down. It's difficult for me to admit this as a writer, but I feel it to be true in my bones. What's more, it doesn't have to be written down in languages that are accessible to outsiders. But this can be hard on those of us who have become estranged from their ancestry in ways that make our roots unclear. On the other hand, it can also be a little dispiriting to get this information at a slant from sources who do not have flesh and blood ties to the culture they're collecting knowledge from. Sources who might have ulterior motives in recording, selecting, and presenting these histories. What does it mean that the collector of the folktale we just heard, William H. Barker, was a white American missionary in Nigeria in the early 20th century and principal of a government school? What does it mean that this man gets the byline for this book, along with a co-author, Cecilia Sinclair, who rarely gets mentioned? For that matter, what does it mean that I, a Jamaican American, am giving you a non-exhaustive, non-specialist survey of this topic? Obviously, I'm satisfied with that last answer after looking into my own motives, or I wouldn't be here, but I think it's imperative to ask when presented with information on whose authority and to what end. Anyway, one of the only things that seems clear to me from this vantage is that people with stories like these, who have knowledge of what fungi are doing embedded into the very stories that they tell about themselves, are operating from a place of great mycophilia. And these mycophilic traditions are continuing into the present in many forms. So I'm gonna share my screen again. And please continue to respond to anything and everything that I share in the chat. I love to scroll through it. Oh. So Gary Linkoff's quote unquote scattered peoples in West and East and Central and Southern Africa gather Termitomyces titanicus, a species of fungus that produces one of the largest fruiting bodies to eat and sell. By the way, Termitomyces titanicus, as the name suggests, is farmed by termite symbionts that cultivate it on partially digested plant material. It may be that the energy saved by the mushroom due to the symbiosis helps them to make such huge fruiting bodies. Scattered peoples in East Central Africa, Uganda, also gather another termite farmed fungus, Termitomyces microcarpus, to make the sauce that a girl's mother serves to her before her wedding night. Scattered peoples in Zimbabwe and Zambia forage for Cantharellus samoensis and Amanita zambiana, or nhedzi, and make a reportedly delicious cream or broth-based soup with the latter. It should be noted that nhedzi can also refer to Termitomyces microcarpus. Scattered peoples all over the continent grow and farm mushrooms in small and large-scale operations, and the growing of the mushrooms is a source of economic empowerment. It's also part of a sound food security strategy. Mushrooms are known as the, poor man's meat everywhere. And so this is a good time to introduce Zimbabwean activist, educator, and mushroom farmer Chido Guevara, who spoke to the BBC as part of their multi-format profile of 100 worldwide women in 2020. Let's go ahead and take a visit, a listen, all of those good things. One day I will surely find a way to efficiently switch between modes on here. This was not the day, and I apologize to you. Okay. And then we move this guy over here. We do that. Let me know that you can hear this, please, within seconds of hearing it.
My first experiences with mushrooms were with forage mushrooms. And I would go in the forest with my grandmother, sit her down, and I would run around collecting different types of mushrooms, bring them to her. And she was so knowledgeable that without her sight working well anymore, she could smell the mushrooms and she could tell which mushroom was edible, which mushroom was poisonous. And she would teach me things like, when you harvest mushrooms in the forest, first of all, you have to cut and leave the stem in the ground. And when you take the mushrooms with the gills, you have to cook them in a pot which is open. And then you keep the door of the house open. And if you ask why we had to do all those things, he says, it's so that the gods of the forest will give you more mushrooms next year. If you close the pot, you close the forest.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Continue to respond in the chat. I love it. So when I first heard this, I was taken by the open pot and open door, and the thought given to the gods of the forest while enjoying their bounty. It's, sustainability all wrapped up into, a beautiful story. And while many of us use scent in our IDs, I found it so cool and so badass that scent here was a primary mode of identifying edible mushrooms. Obviously, there are other inputs happening, probably the feel of the mushroom, knowing where Chido was going to pick them. But it's still striking. It's a very striking epistemological relationship to mushrooms, a different but still deep way of knowing them. So. So, during the slow deepening of my study of the way people use and think about fungi around the world, I've begun to see mushroom love as a continuum. In cultures that abhor or ignore the natural world more generally, or those which are interested in defining themselves as against it rather than as a part of it, we may be likelier to find mycophobic tendencies. I think it would be cool if instead of thinking about how this information about mycophilia versus mycophobia, if instead of thinking about it in a binary chart and you're either mycophobic or mycophilic, maybe you could plug the mycophobia or mycophilia into something like a poem, something that doesn't require you to, be either one way or another all the time. With that unhinged thought, let's move across oceans. So did you all know that about the Haitian origins of zombies? I'm just gonna look through and see if there are any heads, any people nodding. And look in the chat and see if you're saying yes or no. Okay, so a couple of people. It's really cool. Okay, cool. Okay, well, some of you did, a lot of you didn't. I'll read to you an excerpt from an essay I wrote called In Search of Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, or however you pronounce it. Zombies come from 17th century Saint-Domingue, the French colony that would become Haiti and the Dominican Republic. In this iteration, zombie refers to the bodies of those not allowed to pass over to Languinay, literally Guinea or West Africa, that lush green home, paradise. A zombified body can be animated with a will not its own to pay off a debt. Out of the brutal atmosphere in which an enslaved plantation worker led their life sprang the creature who, even after having died, perhaps by their own hand, must still toil endlessly, the balm of rest and impossibility. In this context, the zombie is a spiritual vessel for unspeakable anguish, a repository of hopelessness, no peace even in death. Later, after the revolution, what it means to be a zombie will shift. Zombification will be the result of a voodoo practitioner entrapping the soul of the recently dead, giving the corpse a whiff of that soul, then pressing the resulting creature into service. This manipulation of the boundaries of life and death, the ultimate truth and an important site of Cartesian rationality, is one reason that the Haitian zombie is such a potent figure. If the world seems to have fixed us in our helplessness, but death is not a fixed state, then what else is possible after death? In 1937, Zora Neale Hurston went to Haiti and Jamaica on a Guggenheim Fellowship to study spirituality and magic. In Tell My Horse, her book about the trip, Hurston writes, "What is the whole truth and nothing else but the truth about zombies? I do not know, but I know that I saw the broken remnant, relic, or refuse of Felicia Felix Mentor in a hospital yard." To accompany these words, we get a haunting black and white photograph of that remnant, relic, or refuse, a thin figure in an amorphous dress with an illegible face and lightless eyes, arms flung back as if she's shambling towards the photographer. The space between these two sentences of Hurston's is expansive. It contains countless possible worlds. Felicia died in 1907 and was buried. In 1936, the remnant, relic, or refuse turned up naked on a farm, insisting that she used to live there. Hurston reports that Felicia's remnant is an outlier because in general, recovered zombies had lost the power of speech. Felicia's brother recognized her body and it was sent, still animate, to the hospital. So zombies come from Haiti, from a spiritual context, and have morphed to become something very interesting outside of the place and time where they first evolved. As many of you know, zombification is a shorthand used not just by the public, but also by the mycologists who study and tell us about the parasitic fungi that hijack insect bodies and manipulate them into heading to a cute little spot where they can turn them into efficient spore vectors. The biologist I spoke to ahead of writing this essay had no idea about the aforementioned Haitian origins of zombification as a concept. And I wonder whether the makers of the video game or show Last of Us, where these chicken of the woods looking cordycepoid zombies come from, knew about those origins. They should know. that they were inoculated by a Haitian idea if they, if they don't. I think it's funny that like this parathecium here has this weird like beak thing or hand thing coming out of it. I don't know what that's meant to be. Continuing to move north. So this tuber-looking thing is the sclerotium of a polypore fungus with a crust growth habit in the genus Wolfiporia. As many of you already know, sclerotia such as these are a way for a fungus to keep a store of nutrients underground or wherever for times of drought, when it's freezing, and other environmental hardships, basically when times are tough. It's believed that self-emancipated Black people, those who escaped slavery, used it as a food source. This bit of information is so fascinating to me and world building to me also, because not only does it suggest sort of rarefied knowledge of a very secret biological process happening literally underground, but there again, it also suggests informational and cultural exchange, perhaps between natives and the self-emancipated Blacks in the Southeast USA. And these are alliances that we don't really hear about in history books. Wolfiporia sclerotia are also used in traditional Chinese medicine to invigorate the spleen and promote urination. So in the African diaspora, mushrooms turn up on the canvas as well as on our plates. I was struck by surrealist Hugo Ferrol's painting Solitude, which feels to me like actual footage of quarantine. I stare at it a lot. I stared at it a lot during the early part of COVID. And how many of you all have had Black rice before? Yeah, you've had it? Okay. So you know, okay, all right. Plenty of you know about the splendor and majesty that is Black rice. So this rice dish is both dyed Black and flavored by fungus, and it is exquisite. For those of you who haven't encountered it, allow me to present you with an example of what can happen when someone samples this dish and didn't know what they were getting into. Yes, cook it for the cooking competition. You should know that there are examples of Black rice that are Blacker than that. They're like not just like a sickly weird gray that happens when you did not grow up making it. Okay. It's on Facebook. And everyone can hear this.
Guys, the obsession is too real.
Yes.
See, I came back for that Black rice. You people think
He took the whole
Dilly
store.
John John.
They have no more Black rice.
I finished the whole, you see, I finished the Black
They
rice.
have no more turkey.
Finish the top. See, everything is
He
here.
took their flag.
This ain't food.
Wow.
So this is a Nigerian TikToker.
What?
So as you can see, it is worthy of obsession. That was a Nigerian TikToker who was hating on like all things Haitian cuisine until he tried Black rice and just became obsessed. It really is very delicious. So back in August of 2021, I was snooping around Mushroom Observer and Facebook to see who was talking about which species John mushrooms might be. I had an exchange with mycophile Kurt Miller, who had sent John mushrooms from Haiti to be sequenced, and realized that various clues led him to believe that the mushrooms Haitians forage for dishes like black rice, it's not just black rice that they get used in, are likely a multitude of species in Psathyrolaceae, including mushrooms like Copernellus disseminatus, but that the mushroom that he sent to be sequenced was Condyliomyces. This handful of mushrooms that I ordered off of Etsy, yes, you can get John mushrooms off Etsy, is likely Condyliomyces. And as you know, the drying process concentrates the flavor of most edible mushrooms. So these were very potent. Since black trumpets are one of my favorite edible species, and they also dye things black, and we had enjoyed an incredible sort of season the year that I was researching for this, I added them to the pot as well. And here, very quickly, you can see my non-recipe recipe. I'm kind of a bad person in that even when I'm making something for the first time, and it's not necessarily even mine, you know, something that I should feel comfortable making without a recipe, I do anyway. But I can perhaps be forgiven this time around because black rice generally requires that you use dried shrimp and cashews, both of which would have promptly killed several of the housemates that I lived with at the time due to food allergies. So, and I can send these slides to whomever would like to see things like the recipe up close. So back in December of 2019, I visited my grandmother in the mountains beyond Kingston, Jamaica, not unusual for me. What was unusual was the time of year, because it had been decades since I'd been in Jamaica for Christmas. And in Massachusetts that year, we'd had an erratic rainy season and not as much fungus as the previous year's banner season. So I was especially excited to look for mushrooms around my old home, which overlooks a lush tropical forest. So as usual, I'd been talking about mushrooms just a normal amount. And under the influence of that, my uncle kept a lookout and he showed me some that had sprung up overnight in the backyard and asked what they were. I didn't know. I also couldn't find them in my Southeastern US field guide, nor were there many Mushroom Observer entries for that region. So I went to, you guessed it, Facebook. There I had an exchange with an expert. And those are just, you know, so charismatic, right? And you all likely know exactly who this expert is, because bleeping out his face does not stop you from being able to see the general shape of him. So we figured out what it was, and since I trust this expert with my life, just went ahead and tossed him in the pan. So in the section of the Complete Mushroom Hunter where Mr. Linkoff's chart appears, there's also a note about how any place Great Britain extended its reach was befouled by that empire's craven distrust of the kingdom fungi, and Jamaica is unfortunately no exception. I mean, we'll trouble that a little bit in a moment, but when I offered my grandmother a tiny fried morsel of this delicious mushroom, it turned out to be actually quite delicious, even though it looked like that. She gave me her patented dubious look. That is my 100-year-old grandmother, y'all. Just, you know, just take in the excellence here. But then, miracle of miracles, she tasted it and she said it tasted fine. When I asked if she'd ever eat it again, though, she smiled slyly at me and gestured that the subject was closed. I might continue to work on her, though I might not, because when you reach 100, you should be able to like decide that no one's gonna feed you anything that you don't wanna eat. So Rastas in Jamaican, Rastafarians, are among the original vegans, y'all. It's true, look it up. The way that they eat is all about increasing vitality and strength. So at present, if you want to find a Jamaican recipe with mushrooms in it, you're likely to run into examples of Ital cookery. So Ital is all about increasing one's vitality through the things one consumes, avoiding meat, iodized salt, and artificial colors and flavors. Fast forward to summer of 2021, I'm visiting my mother down in Florida. I'd been asked earlier in the month to write an article about some of my foraging exploits. So we were looking for mushrooms to eat on the nature trail in her condo complex. We didn't eat those Leucoagaricus fruits, but I was using a dichotomous key to try and figure out the identities of some boletes that I thought had some food potential. And my mom marveled out loud at how long it was taking me and how involved the process was. And I said, yeah, they look similar, the fruits of these organisms, to other ones. That's how they get you. You have to key them out properly. And then she said, back home in Jamaica, we only have 2 names for mushrooms, junjo and duppy umbrella. So duppy umbrella means ghost in Jamaican patois. So I just want us to pause for a moment to have that, to like really think on that beautiful goth image of a ghost using a mushroom umbrella. But 3 things raced through my mind at that moment. It was amazing to me that it took her only about 4 years into my debilitating obsession to mention such a minor detail. And also, I could remember hearing the word junja or junjo growing up when it was used to mean schmutz or fuzz or something untidy or unclean. So I never fully absorbed its meaning as mold or mildew or fungus more generally. Also, number 3, junjo and john sound remarkable similar to my ear. Like those sound like very close to the same word. I was not the only one to think that last thought, which became clear when I looked into the matter further. So in this article, published in the journal American Speech in 1958, Robert Wallace Thompson, an Irish linguist, wants to find the African root to the words junjo and john. He seemed not to have found it, or at least not definitively. However, I was stoked to see that he went on to say what he went on to say in this article. On this page, he reports on the fieldwork of a colleague who had spoken to Jamaicans about the edibility of certain mushrooms. This fieldwork was done in 1952, 10 years before Jamaican independence. And it was exciting to me because it hints and teases at the possibility of a hidden mycophilia, which I want to reseed a little bit. So as you can see, this guy is, he's interviewing folks who are like, these are some mushrooms that you can eat. White people call it mushroom, we call it junjo, you know. You can eat some. And this suggests, as you know, folk knowledge that doesn't just start here, because it has, you know, people have to have tested it for a while for someone to say with any authority that this is an edible species. In this part of the article, he said, I would conclude that the inquest on junjo be reopened. We may have to look to the southern United States, in particular to the Gullah dialect, for evidence of this word. So consider the inquest reopened, Mr. Thompson. I had the same thought as him about Gullah folks, because I just have this sense that there is something that I'm not seeing in the cookbooks and the oral histories about sort of what happens when times are rough, what happens when you can't find meat, what happens when the hunting isn't so good. but I just know the evidence is out there. And if you all know, if you have spoken to Gullah folks who have mushroom cookery in their heritage, please do let me know. I am very hungry for that knowledge. So now, seated more firmly in the present and with a sense of awe and expectancy as to where we can go from here, I'll share a couple of just examples of micro-futures in my life. Ahead of the first iteration of this talk, I contacted Teresa Meza, a chef and caterer who works in Mexico City to deliver beautiful, authentic Jamaican food to that population. She came across an article about my foraging and learned I was Jamaican, so she reached out to say that she appreciated my loving mushrooms out loud like this and that I should come to Mexico where they love mushrooms so she could feed me. It wasn't until I asked her about her use of fungi on her own menus a couple of days before the first iteration of this talk that she confessed that she would put them on her catering menus for vegans and vegetarians, but she was a little bit shyer about including them in other dishes because of the stigma back home. In a series of more and more excited Instagram messages, I pointed her to evidence that we are not as uniformly mycophobic as some of us had thought. So she then told me that she has plans to farm mushrooms and that she loved eating and hunting for them personally, and that she was commencing a private study. Jamaican artist Paul Lewin makes these stunning Afrofuturist works that often feature mushrooms heavily. And I just really love this quote from him: "The figures in my work represent my ancestors, ancient ancestors, futuristic ancestors, interdimensional ancestors." So my friend Jasmine has planted a truffle orchard in Virginia, y'all. She was kind enough to put me to work on her farm a couple of Septembers ago, and hanging out with her, I looked at organic material under a microscope for the first time, maybe since high school. She's a brilliant businesswoman and microscopist, and during my visit, we looked to see if the rootlets of the fledgling trees she'd planted had formed truffle mycorrhizas yet. They had not, but we have faith. So please do join me in wishing Jasmine speedy success in her venture. Only 4 to 6 more years of the averagely 5 to 7 years before the first fruit forms. And by the way, truffles do grow wild here in the Northeast. We have reddish tuber canaliculatum, if you didn't know. They associate with spruce, pine, and oak, and I can't wait to be able to live in a place where I can get a dog to train to truffle hunt. So many of you have likely heard of the work of William Padilla Brown, aka mycosymbiote, aka permaculture poppy. He's pioneered techniques for growing cordyceps here in North America. You've probably also seen Alexis Nicole Nelson's incredibly high energy TikToks about foraging by now, but if you haven't looked them up, her enthusiasm is extremely infectious. Another couple of pieces of mushroom art by British artist Jay Percy, who says that her work plays in the seen and unseen realms, and she's inspired by the psychedelic, which is quite clear. In the aforementioned co-op, most members were vegetarian, so it was always fun to go hunting in the urban wilds around my former home with them. And it was also always fun to see folks become super excited when they realize just how ubiquitous mushrooms are, when there isn't a drought, of course. And here is my former co-op mate, Jonah, picking up an old man. Here's just some like delicious curry that I made that has black trumpets, and I just really like to hear simmering pots, and I thought that I could soothe you to play myself out here. But that is basically my talk. I wanted to end on this video, silly sounds aside, to emphasize again, the spore in diaspora, the scattering, the sowing. You never know where a single spore will end up. And in the West, Black people are considered marginalized, but the margins are a place of power. Whether our histories of mycophilia have been buried on purpose or lost to the winds or just lost in translation, as Black mycophiles, we can now imaginatively trace our lineages. We can see ourselves in many places and times and can also imagine myco-futures for ourselves. So thank you so much for your time and attention. And if you have questions, we've racked up quite the chat.
Maria, thank you. That was amazing. Yeah, you're getting a lot of love in the chat. I mean, as you should. That was totally fabulous. It was powerful. That's it, right. I mean, I was telling Maria before she came on that I have non-mushroom people even wanted to see this chat because it sounded so cool and inspiring. And I feel like it was even more inspiring than I imagined. I love the idea of power at the margins, and I love the rejection of these like kind of superimposed binaries in the space in between and at the edges. How fabulous. Okay, well, I think there are probably questions and reactions in here, and also if anyone wants to come on and ask a question. People are asking if you would be willing to share your slides, share your email.
Yes.
Also, we want to have Maria back. I was just going to say, other than making her come back for her book party that we're throwing for her once her book comes out, I don't know, Maria, can I say that we might be able to, I'm really hoping we can have Maria back to do a workshop, because she gave some examples of her ideas and I was like, we're going to need to do every one of those talk and workshop ideas.
I will absolutely come anywhere that you all will have me. Honestly, no cap, legit, like anytime anyone lets me talk for, more than 5 minutes about mushrooms or anything related to mushrooms, I'm super stoked. So,
well, we would be very excited to have you here, and, obviously would facilitate that in every way that we can with our growing oversized budget that we can't seem to shrink.
I'll spend your money.
Please do. That is exactly how we should be spending it. Okay, I think there was let's see, I saw a question. Where's the question? What about desert truffles? That was the question. I understand they are very popular in parts of Africa. I believe they are even exported, and you can sometimes get them in the US.
Yeah, the tea species, Turs, it has a Z in it too. Yes, in super Saharan Africa, they're hunted there.
Actually, I don't know if you all listened. There was an Egyptian mycologist who gave a talk recently. It was like during the day, but he suggested, and I'm not sure if, I don't know if this is true, that the manna described in like various religious texts might actually be desert truffles.
I've heard that espoused too, yeah.
I don't know.
Paul has his hand raised. Hey, Paul.
Hi. Hi, Maria. It's so good to hear you talk. Are you familiar with the story of the African-American woman who was harangued by some 19th century Karens about selling Amanita muscaria in the market? Have you heard that story?
I have not heard that amazingly.
Yeah, it was recorded because the guys in the Department of Agriculture, the Smithsonian Institute, got these people reporting to them that, like, there's this woman selling Amanita muscaria in the market. They're gonna die. So it sounded like so 21st century mycophobia. It's funny. But the guys in the department of wherever assured them, okay, we'll go check. And they looked, and she was selling them, and people buying them new to boil them and detoxify them. And first of all, it's like times never change. And the scientists had to assure them that don't worry, they know what they're doing, even if you don't, But the question is, how did that African-American woman in Northern Virginia, DC area get that recipe? That's like, where did that Native American connection? You mentioned, these vague connections, like unrecorded. And it's like, there's a connection there that, unrecorded. How did the tradition of eating Amanita muscaria end up in DC amongst certain people?
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It's recorded somewhere. But I always think of, who did that? Who learned it? How did, I don't care if you know.
Well, I, as a, Jamaican American woman, learned from like people who grew up with mushrooms as a part of their sort of national culture. Like, one of my first teachers was a Polish woman who took me out to sort of like learn the Foolproof 4 or whatever. And then, it went from there. But I don't think she did much of the sort of like hardcore prep for things that have toxins in them. But if she did, I would know that.
Maybe it's one of those extra recipes in the back of the appendix of her book that she forgot to tell you about. Oh, I knew how to do that. Sure. Yeah. But you connected to someone from a different ethnic group. Well, that happened somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains somewhere, that these people learned from someone else that you could eat Amanita muscaria, and that, there's that connection that it's hard to read. Hidden mycelium.
Mm-hmm.
So the Smithsonian Folklife Festival last summer invited Ma to have a booth as part of a larger like Earth optimism area. And that was just coming to mind so many points during your talk. The excitement that people from other places who were there at the festival had to see our booth and were coming to share their stories of wherever they were from and what their mushroom culture was, including people from Africa and the islands. I remember a guy, I think he was from Uganda, talking about women with the big baskets on their backs coming home to the village with giant hauls of mushrooms. But yeah, there's so much culture that doesn't get written down that I think that's part of the point of the Folklife Festival too, right? To share those stories. So that was a really cool experience, I think, for those of us that volunteered there.
One thing that this also made me think of was this story that I heard at one of the NUMF talks about a species, how this kind of knowledge can be passed down, and about a species of stinkhorn, I think. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
Maria?
we were at the same talk. It was
yes, it was Noah. Yeah.
And I was fascinated by that. What is it that they would use the stinkhorn somehow to triangulate where beehives were and to find honey?
Yes.
So
Like,
cool.
what an amazing, I don't know, just like what an amazing way of knowing.
Mm-hmm. I gotta add that to this talk.
This talk is a book, and I can't wait to buy it.
Yay. I'm going to be reminding you all in spring of 2024 when I turn that in. I'm like, the countdown is here.
Excellent. No, that's terrific.
Thank you all so much.
This was just such a joy. Thank you so much.
So much, yes. And thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you sometime this month at one of the many events, or May 2nd for our next meeting. Yes, and I'll keep everyone posted about when we get to have Maria and also Alden back, because there was these two were too good. We need more. Thank you. All right, good night.
Our first morale foray this weekend.
Oh, right. Yeah, stay tuned. All right, good night, everybody. Thank you so much, Maria. Take care, everyone.